As an enforcement agency, we have some strict rules that we enforce, and I'm going to be speaking more about this, but there are certainly things that we see can be improved within marketing and online UX design. So I'm sure that by the end of my presentation, you will have some questions, and please feel free to ask them. I will be here more as a consultant than as an enforcement agency, I would say. So I'm going to find everybody by the end of this talk. Don't worry. So who am I and where do I work and why am I here? My name is Dries Cuijpers. That's the way it's pronounced. So you did really well. I'm not sure where you are, but yes. And if you know how to pronounce my name, by the way, you also know how to pronounce Johan Cruyff, because it's actually the same thing. I am a coordinator for the digital economy within the consumer division of the Authority of Consumers and Markets. Wow, that's a lot. So I work in consumer protection, and I do so within an authority that has wider powers. So this authority in the Netherlands is responsible for antitrust, which means we detect and find cartels. We look at mergers that want to take place, but we also regulate, for example, the former monopolies as the energy sector, which is very relevant nowadays, gas transportation in the Netherlands, telecommunications, and finally, but not least importantly, we look at consumer protection. And consumer protection is the area that I will speak about today, and I'll go into more detail at a later stage. This is just to set the scene. So from my work, we do look at a lot of different areas, and the digital domain is just one of them. And within the digital domain, there's many different things that we look at. And what we call online persuasion, or there's different ways to speak about it. Some people call it dark patterns or deceptive design, is one of the topics which is pretty high on our agenda. And that's actually what I want to speak about you today. So let's go back a bit in time. And I'll need to remember to switch those. So over the last 2 decades, I think we've seen a very significant shift in online marketing. Whereas probably 2 to 3 decades ago, online marketing was really about recommending and showcasing products and services, where it feels to me that nowadays we are much more in a world, in a marketing world, where businesses like yours are trying to steer consumer demand and consumer choice. That is really a significant change. And how has this come about? Well, there's a couple of reasons, really. I think it has been made possible by several very significant changes in the world. They're right there on that little list. First of all, the enormous or the vast amount of data that are being collected about consumers allow you guys to know what we want, when we want it, how we want it, and how we can probably be persuaded to buy it. Secondly, automated decision-making. Of course, the use of AI has made it possible to really upscale the use of this data and to actually real-time adapt online selling spaces, for example, which wasn't possible 15, 20 years ago. Also, the use of behavioral science or psychology has tapped into this development, because we know a lot more about how our brains work and how we can actually bypass some of the, or actually make use of some of the automated response systems that our brain has, which psychologists usually call heuristics or biases. And fourthly, of course, we see a continuous development of new online selling spaces. I mean, we have moved away from, well, we haven't moved away. We always had, and we probably will have for a long time, just a normal website. But we firstly moved to apps. And soon, I guess, we'll also be moving to new areas like a metaverse, which is really driven by AR and VR. So all these aspects have, I think, contributed to that change that we've seen. Now, I think there is a lot of benefit for consumers, let's be frank. But as an enforcement agency and responsible for looking at the risk and protecting consumers, we also have quite a few concerns, and we see actually some real harms taking place. This actually hasn't been on the radar for that long, but it is now, and there is a global discussion and certainly a European discussion on what we need to do to restrict or limit or end the use of these dark patterns. And legislators are certainly debating how to do that. I'll get back to that later on in my presentation. So I think this is a very important context for you guys, because this is the context that you work in. So as an enforcement agency, as the ACM, we have set our ambition to restore what we call a healthy balance between the business community and customers or consumers, where consumers can make and remain to make independent choices that are in line with their own interests, and not so much maybe with the interests of the business trying to sell a product or service. So I think the marketing community, so you, has a really important role to play in this development. And it requires that we all start building what we call fair designs. So fair designs for consumers, for customers, where they can buy and not be misled. So I want to provide you a couple of examples of that we have recently either seen or dealt with. And I'm going to go over them pretty quickly, but I think it's important to note that these are all existing things. They're not made up. So the first one is a practice that we have recently concluded with Amazon. What you see is 2 Amazon pages of the way to cancel your subscription to Amazon Prime. Prior to our intervention, it took you probably half an hour or more, and you needed to skip through at least 30 to 40 pages to cancel your subscription, if you were at all able to find how to do it. And of course, there is a rule in the law, but also more ethically, that of course people need to be able to get rid of a subscription if they no longer want it. Well, that was very hard. So we sat around the table with Amazon and convinced Amazon to change its ways, and it did. So now there's only 2 clicks needed to end your subscription of Amazon Prime in Europe. So this has taken European-wide effect. And it's also probably interesting to note that, for example, Germany, inspired by this case, has introduced a law which actually makes a cancellation button mandatory, and the cancellation cannot be more than 2 clicks away. So this is one example. The other one, and this is to show you that we're not dealing with something new, is a case from my authority that which we did back in 2014. This is what is a grab from the website back then from the low-cost carrier called Ryanair. And what Ryanair did is, if you bought a ticket, you were then led to the next page where you could book your hotel, rent a car, and you could also get a travel insurance. Or you couldn't, it's not you could get, you were getting a travel insurance. Because the thing that you needed to do if you were to not want one is you needed to know that within the drop-down menu where you were supposed to select your country, you could find "Don't insure me" in between Denmark and Finland, which nobody, of course, found. So I think this is a very, very clear example of a misleading design, which was, of course, fined by our authority and then changed by Ryanair. And the last one is an example. I don't know which company it is, but it doesn't really matter. I think it's an interesting example, probably not for the money that we're talking about, but I would say the aggression with which marketing is being conducted here, because what you've done is you have bought a product and put it in your basket, in your shopping basket, and then very sneakily, the company adds another product. Well, you could say it's only £1. Yes, it is. It's only £1, but there is something added to your shopping basket, and if you are not paying attention, you will buy for that product and you'll get it. So another example of what I call deceptive design. Let's see. Yeah, so now you may think, or this may even be true, that my business is all good intentions. We will certainly not deceive consumers, and we certainly don't aim to. We don't deploy dark patterns in our online marketing. However, statistically, this is very likely to be untrue, and I hate to say this, but I want to give you, there is, I should say, increasing amount of empirical research which tells us that dark patterns are very, very prevalent in online sales, and actually that this is only increasing. I want to give you an example. Just prior to the summer, the European Commission commissioned a study which showed that 97% of all the retail websites that had been checked in that report had at least one dark pattern on them, at least. And there were many that had many more. So I think this really requires from the online marketing community to take a hard look at itself and ask yourself the question, what we're doing, is that really what we should be doing? And we have recognized this at the authority, and we know that some of these assessments or questions that you will be posing yourself aren't easy ones, whether something is allowed or not. So what we have done, what we have done, I think, just close to 2 years ago, is we have published what we call the Guidelines of the Protection on Online Consumers. So this is a document, and I'll speak about it more just later on, that contains our interpretation of the Dutch, but predominantly European law that protects consumers in relation to all those online marketing techniques. So in the document, we describe where we draw the line legally of what is allowed and what isn't. And we also provide examples of what you can do and what you can't do. So this is really a document which is out there to help you guys. So I hope you really take a look at it, read it closely, and also use it internally to have a debate about certain things. I should notice we're actually coming with an updated version of these guidelines fairly soon. I think it will be early November. So keep an eye out for those, because I think they do reflect, of course, the interpretation of the Dutch authority, but I'm pretty confident to say that it also will reflect the interpretation of the wider European authorities to a large degree. So if you do business in Europe, this is probably something you should look at. And I think I should also mention, so there's a link to our guidelines right there. I've also added another link, which is a document produced by the European Commission itself, where it also explains how it interprets consumer law, also specifically in relation to the digital space, and that document is also available. Well, I did mention, of course, I should take a step back. Before I really go back to the guidelines and tell you what's in them, I think it is relevant to tell you a little bit about consumer protection law. And I know that many of you may find the subject of law very boring. I'm a lawyer, and I think I have to say that I sometimes agree. But I think it is highly relevant, though. So that's why I want to dwell on it for a couple of minutes. So consumer law, and when I say consumer law, I really speak about European consumer law, because that also constitutes the vast amount of Dutch consumer law, is a very wide package of different regulations and laws. And it provides consumers with rights. So I think there's probably a couple of rights that you're familiar with. For example, the right to a warranty. So if you buy something and it breaks down, you can actually bring it back. Another right as online marketeers, which you should be very familiar with, is the right of withdrawal. So if a customer buys something, he or she will have a 14-day period to actually reconsider the purchase and tell you, no, sorry, I don't want it anyway, so I'm sending it back. Now, one additional piece of legislation in Europe, which is probably not as well known, is known by the difficult name of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. Well, that's a whole mouthful, but I think I can summarize to you pretty easily what it means. It's a open norm, so it basically says, as a business, in a commercial, in a sales process, you cannot deceive, you cannot mislead the consumer. So what does that mean? It means that you cannot tell lies. You cannot say things that are not true about a product. You cannot omit or leave out very important information. So if there are certain characteristics, so for example, compatibility, for example, let's say you buy a digital device and you need to know whether it's compatible with another device. And you're buying it for that specific reason, you need to know whether it's compatible. If it's not, and that information is omitted, that can be a violation of this law. Also, you cannot treat consumers aggressively. And you probably think, well, aggressively, I'm not shouting over the phone. If that's what you're doing, probably not. But I think aggressively in the digital domain takes on a whole new perspective. So, for example, nagging someone with continuously reminding them with pop-ups that you haven't completed your sale, for example, could be an aggressive practice. And I think the final example I wanted to give, and certainly, and probably most relevant for this context, is you cannot trick people into making decisions that they would otherwise not have made. And that is actually how it's written in the law. So I guess I'll repeat. So you cannot mislead consumers in the sense that they will start making decisions that they otherwise would not have made. And that's actually something that you probably need to think about for a while, because it means quite a lot. So what does it mean? Let's get practical, because I think that's probably what you're most interested in. So in our guidelines, we have identified 11 different techniques, and there's going to be more in the new guidelines, which we thought were relevant to mention in the guidelines. These are commonly used, and they may be known by different names or different descriptions, but I think generally you will catch the drift when you see them. That we think you should all know, where the limits are. And I'm not going to take you through the whole list, because that would probably take me way over time, and I was told not to do that. So there's only 3 topics I want to highlight. The first one is personalization, which I think is the second one on the list. And of course, this is like a massive trend within online marketing, I would say. So probably worthwhile spending some time on. Personalization can take many different shapes and forms, but the first one that occurs in my mind is price personalization. I know that there's no business out there that actually openly says at the moment, or I'm not aware of it, that they personalize prices, but I know that many businesses are looking at it, and some have actually started, very carefully engaging in it. So if you personalize your price, European law tells you explicitly that you need to inform the consumer about the fact that you do. This is probably not widely known, but it is absolutely the case. So bear that in mind. The second thing is, if you personalize, you're using a customer's data to gain information on what he or she wants, what he or she is prepared to pay for a product, potentially. And you may run a risk of abusing weaknesses that are known to you, either voluntarily or involuntarily, when trying to adjust an offer or adjust a selling space or a price to that specific consumer. And you have to make sure that you're not abusing those weaknesses, because if you do, you actually do violate European law. So that is a huge responsibility, which I think not enough people are aware of. The second point is what we call unfair order and presentation. I think this is probably better known as paid ranking. So if you engage, or if you are working for a search engine or a price comparison website, or if you have a retail website where you, in some way or form, change the order of the products that are available on the website when someone searches, and if you have incentives, financial or non-financial, to put some search results higher than others, then you need to let the consumer know that you're doing so. Because it's the only way for the consumer to gain information on the fact that the product that he or she sees high on top is probably not the best choice, but it's the choice that is best for the business. So absolutely make sure that you disclose this, and that you disclose this in plain language. So not in a gray small font somewhere, I don't know, completely on the right side, out of scroll. No, that's not disclosure. That is actually hiding information. And the third one I want to mention, and this has already generated quite a bit of debate certainly within Europe and also in the Netherlands, is social proof. So social proof also comes in many different shapes and forms, but the one I want to single out here is what is probably known to you as customer reviews, customer likes, customer views, profiles, everything that makes a consumer engage, and which could support sales of your product or service. Now, I'm not telling any secrets here when I say that there's a lot of fake engagement out there. It's actually very easy to buy. If you go online, you Google buy fake likes or fake reviews, there's plenty of people that are willing to sell them to you. Usually very hard for us to do something about it, because very often these websites or these people are not based in the Netherlands and also not in Europe, and very often also not well, no, it doesn't really matter. What I want to say is using fake reviews, using fake likes, using fake views, fake followers, and whatever have you, all is a violation of European law if you use it to support your product or service. So I guess to many that's not new, but it also requires from a business, whether you're selling or whether you're actually facilitating this service, because there is many businesses facilitating review services to others, make sure that you are absolutely doing everything you can to block those. I know it's a bit of an arms race, because on the other side there's a lot of people that actually do want to sell those fake likes and fake views, but there is a high responsibility on the marketing community to make sure that consumers can actually still trust reviews and use them in the way that they were originally intended, i.e. to inform them about their best choice. Feel free afterwards, if you have questions about any of the other ones, write it down and ask them, please. So, also, as a part of the guidelines, we have come up with a set of principles for ethical design. I'm not going to speak about those, just have a look at them. I think they speak for themselves and make a lot of sense. So I think, looking at the time, I can't really see because there's something 12, yeah. So I'm going to use another 3 minutes, I think, to wrap up and speak about what I hope you take away from my talk, and then I'm happy to receive all your questions. So really, there's two things that I hope you take away from my talk. The first one is that it's really, really important that your design is fair to consumers. We think, and we've spoken to the business community quite extensively over the last 2 years, ever since publishing the guidelines, and it struck me that the general awareness, legal awareness and ethical awareness in the marketing community is not as high as I hoped for. And I think it is a responsibility of your community, your business or sector or business to make sure that you get this up to speed. Because if you don't, first of all, you run a risk. You run the risk of us or any other enforcer intervening in your business. And generally, I can tell you that that's not a really good thing in terms of marketing. And secondly, I think it also negatively impacts, of course, the customer image of your business. So it will affect your business. So if anything, please make sure that you invest in fair design. Make sure that you're up for future legislation, that you're ready for it, because there is going to be a lot of things changing. The requirements are going to be more strict in the near future. So you're not only doing your customers and yourselves a favor, but you're also making sure that you're ready for the future. And you can do so internally, of course, but there is also quite some self-regulatory initiatives out there. And there is certainly one in the Netherlands, but also internationally, there are groups of people thinking about how to make fair design, how to have an ethical design. If you're interested, you can, of course, join them just to learn. And I think So I think really, if you want to get your compliance up to speed, there's probably two things you can do. The first one is hire relevant expertise. So if you don't have any lawyers that know how to interpret the law, make sure that you have them. I know many businesses do have them for the privacy law, so for the GDPR. But generally, we don't see many companies that know about the UCPD, to use that abbreviation. And secondly, I think it's important that you incorporate the thinking about these issues in your governance. So make sure that procedures exist by which you can guarantee that this ethical or legal awareness is being shared within the process of online marketing. Because what we often see is there's many different people within the online marketing chain. They all do their separate bit. There's the data expert, there's the UX designer, there's the marketeer, but nobody really actually looks at the whole picture and says, what are we actually doing? Well, I'm not saying this goes for your business, but it certainly happens. And I think the last one I want to point out is what I call test, test, test. Now, I know that many of you are doing very extensive A/B testing, always with the goal of optimizing your sales. And I would like you to add something to that. Make sure that you also test with the same tools that you have at your disposal, the comprehension by consumers. What actually did the consumer thought he was buying? What did he get? Did he understand how he was led through the process and where he maybe could have taken other choices that were not apparent to him or her? I think this is crucial to understand whether you're complying with the law. I think it also makes a lot of sense from a business perspective, because it actually does help you to better understand your customer and their needs. So I think it's a two-edged sword. Is that the right one? Double-edged sword, right? Yeah, that's the one. Thanks. I was mixing in some Dutch there. So I think, and I want to mention, so we're also, to illustrate the importance of this testing, we're actually at the moment, as we speak, doing some experiments, field experiments with Dutch businesses that want to explore this realm with us. So we keep an eye out. We're probably going to publish the results, I hope, by the end of this year. Depends, of course, a bit on the experiments themselves. So I think that really wraps up what I wanted to say to you today. I hope you forgive me for being very clear and persistent, and sometimes maybe a bit provocative. But I think personally that this is really, really important for your community to make a shift. I know that some of you certainly are already doing so, but I think we need more, and we need it globally. So thank you very much, and please bring forth the questions. Yes, please. Can you use the catch box, throw box? It is orange, though. I love that. Oh.
Well, thank you. Very patriotical of you. So I had a quick question in the Netherlands as well. So you mentioned about the unfair order and presentation with sponsorships and ads and tags. That makes sense. How about with websites such as Indeed and Monsterboard? Because they ask really in large amounts of money for ranking your job postings on these websites. And I don't think that they actually say that something is sponsored very clearly. Maybe I missed out on that part, but from experience, there's a lot of money that goes into that. How about them?
Yeah, so I guess the money you're talking about is the business-to-business money, right? So it's the people that pay for the postings. Well, I have to say, doing consumer protection law, it doesn't apply in a business-to-business setting. Yeah, sorry. So unfortunately, we won't be protecting those people that are paying those sums of money. But I would certainly, well, the thing, this is a difficult, I think we've had this question in the past. So I need to really dig deep here. But the question is, so it really, this is an absolute hateful lawyer response, but it really depends on the circumstances. But the thing is, I need to really conceive what this would mean for a consumer who is actually looking for a job and for job postings, and how does the payment affect what he or she sees, and what does that mean for the relevance of the search results? I think this is a slightly different question that I would really have to think about, but we wouldn't be protecting the advertisers, I'm afraid.
No, that's all fine. I was just wondering about the people that are looking for a job.
Yeah.
That was more how would they know that's, for example... If
not disclosed, they wouldn't.
No, exactly.
No, exactly. Right. Yeah, and the thing is that, is that a problem? Maybe. I don't have a definite answer, but it's, definitely good that you pointed out.
And I have another one, actually.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Okay. It's about the social proofing, the fake likes and reviews. I wrote down, what about the influencers? I think I know the answer already, but if quite a few consumer companies use influencers to promote their products, they all use their, it's sponsored ads and everything, but what if they buy fake likes? Who's responsible?
They are.
The influencer or the company?
Probably both, if there's a paid or incentivized link between the two. So in the end, usually consumer law always holds responsible the actual seller. But in this case, the influencers would absolutely be, we've got a case to show it. So we actually did find an influencer who bought a lot of fake likes. And there's many more, but we needed to set an example. And this case was actually provided to us by the Dutch police. It was pretty severe. So we did find this person. Yeah. And I think additionally, influencer marketing is a topic in itself. I could have probably spoken a whole morning about it. But I think also very relevant for influencer marketing is, of course, the fact that they need to disclose that they're actually marketing something. So that's another one I just want to, I know it wasn't your question, but I want to mention it anyway. Who can we throw the orange box to next? Yes, please, the back table.
Hi. When you were talking about social proofs and that fake reviews and everything is prohibited by law in Europe, what about examples? Like I work in insurance and we have like a lot of examples how the insurance worked. Like someone broke his leg and then he went to the doctor and blah, blah, blah. He got his money. If these aren't like actual examples that happened, are these also a problem or how is it?
Interesting question. So you don't attribute them to any person. You're not saying Mr. or Mrs. X said A or B.
Yeah, usually it's like Peter broke his leg, he blah blah blah, or I don't know, the
Yeah.
family Smith, they had the problem with floods and
It's something I would have to think about a bit longer. I mean, it wouldn't, to my mind, it would not immediately qualify as a fake review if you're not contributing to like a consumer or customer, or even if it's a fake one. I mean, in marketing, you do, in every, I mean, in advertising, on TV advertising, you get these stories too, right? Where Peter bought such and is really happy with what he did. So I'm trying to think of the parallels, and I don't think I have an immediate assessment for you, but to me, it feels more like that. But I could imagine that there is a thin line between the two, and you have to be very careful.
thank you.
There's one and one in the back.
Hi, yes. So first, thanks for the presentation. And my question was, are neuromarketing techniques also considered deception or kind of deceptive technique to use?
So I think I have a question back to you. But first, I mean, we hardly ever label a marketing technique as deceptive, period. But I think my question to you would be, which new marketing technique do you mean? Because we need to, you know, in order to assess, we need to speak very specifically.
Yeah, so for instance, overall neuromarketing is based on stimulating the senses of humans. So for
Yeah.
instance, the basic example of putting bread near the
Yeah.
entrance so people smell and want to buy it. It's kind of not forcing you to buy it, but then it's a
Yeah.
little bit intrusive.
Yeah, exactly. So you're probably speaking about things like emotional marketing or neuromarketing and all these kind of developments.
Exactly.
So I think generally they run the same risks that I described for some of the other techniques, which is the more you know about the customer and the more you specify or tailor make marketing to the individual, the higher the risk is that you actually abuse some of the knowledge that you have about them or that you abuse their weaknesses. And that would certainly be a violation of European law. And that's something I don't think we would want as a society, because you're actually manipulating people to buy something. So I think probably one of the important questions to ask yourself when deploying those techniques is, do I affect the autonomy of this person to make a choice, and to make a choice which is based on their best interests? And I think as soon as you start deviating away from that, you're getting into a gray zone.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah,
All right,
definitely.
thanks. I think there was a question in the back there.
I will try, but yeah.
And I probably, while we're transitioning and people are throwing things off the table, maybe just to say that to me personally, this also taps into a wider, almost maybe philosophical or political discussion, which is we do see online, we do see a lot of tendencies to steer and manipulate consumers into certain directions, right? That's, for example, take the example of fake news. So I think this is a dangerous development that we should absolutely be very vigilant towards in our open democratic societies. And I think, you know, when we're using manipulative marketing, this actually is sort of a part of that bigger problem where we're trying to steer people into certain directions. And I'm not saying this is as big a problem or as important, and maybe it is, but to me, it actually feels very much related. I just wanted to paint that broader picture. Sorry.
Hi. I have a question. Is chargeback also part of consumer rights?
Sorry, is what part?
Is a chargeback consumer right? Chargeback on debit card or a credit card is also part of.
I'm not sure if I'm getting what you're saying. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, chargeback. Hang on. And in what sense would that be? Trying to think of. Just be a bit more precise. So a chargeback, for example, that a consumer receives after he's bought a product or service,
No.
and then you get a cashback or whatever.
No, what I mean to say, to explain in detail, when consumer purchase something on the website,
Yeah.
from a marketing website or any website, what's their right towards chargeback on those purchase?
So with chargeback, you mean that they can send it back and incur the money back, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So yes. So, well, in Europe, I think that's one I mentioned during my talk, is that within Europe, there is this 14-day withdrawal period for online purchases. So if you send your product back within 14 days, and some businesses actually extend this period voluntarily, you will have to get your money back within a certain amount of time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, hi.
Hi.
I have a question as well. So, a couple of different questions. The first one is around what we recently heard is Harlem became the first city in the world to ban meat products advertising. Is it a right approach to stop information from flowing to the customer? Would it not be the right approach to share information on how much carbon emissions went into making this burger, for example?
Yeah, so you're tapping into a pretty difficult question. Well, I'm not a big believer in bans per se, unless we can prove that some practices are never ever benefiting the consumer. So I don't think that counts for advertising, but you may think about some of the practices on the list. Potentially, they could be so harmful that you would actually not want to see them. But this is probably more a personal opinion or a political debate, and really, a question to an enforcement agency, because we just deal with the law. And I mean, in this case, the law is pretty open, so we're there to interpret. I think generally, yes, the answer is please provide the customer with information. But we know that this also has its limits, and this is also sometimes being abused. So it's well known within psychology and behavioral biases that you can overload a customer with information, and that's a perfectly manipulative trick to actually make people stick to the default. So if you provide so much and confusing information that a consumer will not engage with it, is actually not helpful. And this is again why I probably point to my second recommendation: test, test, test. If you want to know how the information comes across and what it does with your customer, and if he actually absorbs the information and uses it to make well-informed decisions, that is something to be found out in specific cases. I'm not sure if this fully answers your question. Please add if it didn't, but these are the thoughts that I immediately had.
Does your agency, for example, have guidelines on how much information should be presented to the customer and in a way which does not overload the customer but shares the relevant information?
To the word. No, I wish. No, the thing here is, this is actually where, and we're not saying to the business community for nothing that this is your responsibility. So the law can provide the principles, and in these guidelines, we actually try to take it a level deeper and give as much guidance as we can. But there comes a level where it's so dependent on the circumstances that we can by no means, facilitate every single example out there in the world. First of all, we wouldn't have the time to do it. And secondly, you would probably be confronted with a 1,587-page document and you wouldn't read it. So this is really, I think, where our worlds meet, and where, based on the guidance that we provide, businesses should actually make sure that they test in specific circumstances how it works. And we're very interested. And there is some rules of thumb, of course, from behavioral science on things that work and don't work. But I think if you really want to know specifically, you need to do the work.
Okay. And my other question was around social proofing, but from the other side, like, for example, companies who delete reviews which are not favorable to the product. For example, recently we heard that Amazon released a new TV show called The Rings of Power, and there were negative reviews on IMDb and they also own IMDb, so they deleted some of those reviews. So is that not also an unfair customer like
Well, it
social
isn't.
proof?
I'm not saying it's not a problem. I think it is a problem. It's probably more a competition problem because it's one company using the review system to get the other out of business. If I understand you well, it's not a consumer protection problem because ultimately, the consumer could be deceived thinking a product is really bad where it isn't. So yes, in that sense, it could be. But this is really a problem within the B2B relationship, I would say. So certainly not something that we would prioritize as an enforcement agency. I think for us, we would look more at those cases, and I think they're much more common as well, where businesses are trying to boost their product or service using fake reviews, likes, what have you.
Okay, thanks.
I think there's one question here. And thank you so much, by the way, for all these questions.
Nice.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'd like to dwell on the last question because I was also thinking about it. You said that you're protecting the consumer, right? And as long as the company doesn't try to introduce themselves in a forged way, in an untrue way, I mean, the topic that the colleague just mentioned, what about when the other company tries to show the competitor in a bad way? Wouldn't that be a practice that would deceive the customer, the consumer? Wouldn't that be a problem?
Well, I think that's really just what I answered. I think what I said is, it could be. So the customer could be deceived by that, like thinking that a product or service is not as good as it maybe really is. Yes, I think it could be. Although the difficult thing is consumer law is based on the idea of a transaction. So, and there's no real transaction between the customer and the competitor who's trying to bad image its competitor. So you're really talking about a fictional transaction or a transaction not taking place. And that is something which is really, really hard to prove. So I don't think we could do anything from a consumer perspective. Not saying this is not a problem, right? It definitely is. I know the issue. I know the problem. But this is really taking place into a business-to-business relationship for which consumer protection law is certainly not created. So it would either have to be civil action, which is taking place a lot, and potentially something that falls within the competition realm. But I don't think consumer law would be the apt tool to tackle this issue.